Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. While Hungary's Prime Minister is spending his holiday in Asia, the country's opposition calls for snap elections. So is this the twilight of Viktor Orbán's rule? Well, to discuss it, we're joined by Péter Kreko, director of the Political Capital Institute and a fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, first of all, why is the main opposition party in Hungary, that's TISA, calling for early elections right now?
Yes, good question. I have to say at the very beginning that in Hungary there hasn't been any early elections since 1990, so since the regime change, and I don't expect that it is going to happen now for a simple reason, and this is that in the polls, the TISA party is leading and it's ahead of Fidesz. So in an election this Sunday, most probably the TISA party would beat Viktor Orbán and Viktor Orbán could lose the power. And also that's partially a response to your question, because that's why Péter Magyar is calling for an early election. Most of the reliable polls show that he could be the winner of an election in the coming months, and it's highly unlikely that Viktor Orbán and Fidesz could improve the public sentiment, and especially the economic sentiment in Hungary, to an extent that they would be able to win the election. And also there is one more element to that, and this is related also to domestic politics. If you call for an early election, it always raises this feeling of crisis. And Péter Magyar wants to create this crisis sentiment so that he is the only one who can save the country from the economic and political turmoils that we are having at the moment. But again, I don't really see it is a viable option. It is totally against the government's interest and Viktor Orbán's interest to have an early election at the moment when we're not leading in the polls.
Obviously, it is against Viktor Orbán's interest, but the question is whether we observe sort of a fatigue in Hungary, that people are simply tired with Viktor Orbán after long years of his domination of the Hungarian political scene. So, you know, the question is whether this general sentiment could lead to early elections. You said no, so I guess that's the answer. But the real question is how much can change in this 2 years? Because if I'm not mistaken, the next parliamentary elections are due to take place in 2026. So do you think that Péter Magyar can still capitalize on this sentiment of crisis, as you said, for such a long time?
Yes, good question. And I would say that it's important that you also mention the current visit of the Prime Minister to India. Finally, in the Hungarian politics, we can see that while Viktor Orbán has been a Teflon politician, and he was a Teflon politician for almost 15 years, which means that nothing sticked on him. No corruption scandals, no personal issues, no political mistakes could really lead to a decline of his popularity. Right now, we can see that this Teflon era is over, and we have political scandals in Hungary that finally have some political consequences, and we can see the results in the polls. So the next election we will have it in less than 1.5 years time, so in 2026 April. And if you take a look at the concerns of the voters, they are mostly related to issues that are really difficult to change in a short period of time. Economy, that is in rather a bad shape, but this is more because of structural issues and because Hungary did not receive the EU funds. Unlike right now, Poland gets back the frozen funds. Hungary seems to lose most of the frozen EU funds. Second, healthcare. This is also something that you won't change in 1.5 years' time. And third, education. And these are all issues that Viktor Orban cannot solve overnight, and therefore I think your question is valid. How much the government will be able to improve the public opinion in these dimensions, and I think this is partially because of that in the last few days we could hear that the Hungarian government is watching closely at the Romanian example. So the termination of results of the Romanian elections and repetition of the election might be something that serves as a model for Viktor Orban's Hungary. In the case that I think there is a strategy or a scenario on the governmental side that in the case that they see that they won't be able to win the election, there can decide about suspending Péter Magyar as a candidate, or even to suspend the electoral results after the election. And of course, this is an extreme scenario, but it's quite visible how Viktor Orban's government and all the politicians of Fidesz are talking in a very homogeneous manner and about the same lines about how the Romanian election, the electoral interference from a foreign force, raised an issue, a model that can be followed by Hungary. So I think right now the government is thinking about alternative solutions. What can they do if they simply won't have the electoral majority in the next elections? But we also have to tell that 1.5 years' time is a long period, and Viktor Orban has been highly successful in turning the public opinion in a short period of time. So we have to wait and see. I think Péter Magyar is a similar political animal than Viktor Orban, but we cannot tell it at the moment for sure that it's Péter Magyar who is going to be the winner of the next election in 2026. A lot of things can happen until then.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, these two political animals, as you call them, have very different views on helping Ukraine. Now, as you said, Viktor Orban can easily sway the public opinion, and so far he has convinced Hungarians that they shouldn't support Ukraine militarily. Now, can the next government, if indeed Péter Magyar and TISA party win the next elections, can they change this approach?
Hard to tell for a very important reason. Foreign policy has been a field where we can see the least difference in the visions of Péter Magyar, between the visions of Péter Magyar and Viktor Orban. Péter Magyar's assessment is that most of the Hungarians agree with the foreign policy of the government, which is mostly true, but for a very important reason, that it hasn't been challenged in the public. If you're the only guy who play foreign policy, then of course your foreign policy will be the one that people think that makes sense. So, and even in the Ukraine issue, while Péter Magyar clearly has a different tone regarding Ukraine, and for example, he visited Ukraine after one of the rocket attacks against Kiev last summer. But when he talks about Ukraine, he also uses a critical tone. He also mentions, for example, the abuse of the rights of ethnic Hungarians in Transcarpathia, and he mentions the typical nationalist topics in Hungary, because he thinks that foreign policy is not the field when he has to challenge he has to challenge the government on domestic political fields, in economy, in healthcare, in education, in corruption, which seems to burn on the government. So I think I would not expect a U-turn in the Ukraine policy of the Hungarian government if TISA party would be in a majority in the next elections. I would rather expect a 90% turn. But of course, in that point, I think it's also important who are your foreign policy allies. And in the case of TISA party, and you just showed a picture on Manfred Weber and Péter Magyar. So TISA party is in the European People's Party, and I think there is no better socialization environment than the European People's Party that has a very hawkish stance on the Ukraine issue. So that's why I would rather expect that Péter Magyar also cannot go too far in following Orban in the nationalist direction when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, because European People's Party simply won't tolerate that. So that's why I would expect a 90% turn if Péter Magyar comes to power. But his rhetoric, for example, regarding Russia, regarding China, and regarding these revisionist superpowers threatening Hungary's sovereignty is drastically and dramatically different than Viktor Orban. So I think there are foreign policy differences as well. And also there are foreign policy differences when it comes to the European Union. Péter Magyar uses a much milder tone, even when he's critical towards the European Union, than Viktor Orban, who regards the European Union as the archenemy of Hungarian sovereignty and also an archenemy.
And therefore I have a question about a channel that was, created to promote European values. I'm talking about Euronews. Now, according to Hungarian investigative journalists, the Euronews channel has been acquired by a businessman close to Viktor Orban with the use of public money. Now, you mentioned that he used to be a Teflon politician. Now, could this affect his support?
Honestly, I don't think so. I don't think so, because this is not an issue that is so important for the Hungarian public. There has been many very bizarre acquisitions of assets from public money. I think it more has an international relevance, and the international relevance is that Viktor Orban is very conscious in building up Hungary's international influence, Hungary's soft power. And as we could see in the United States, for example, the big impact Hungary made on the thinking of MAGA Republican Donald Trump himself, this is not something as just a pipe dream. This is, to a certain extent, a reality. Viktor Orban similarly wants to influence the European public opinion. Then he influenced the US public opinion on the right, and I think he regards Euronews as a possible tool for that, even if I think so far we just cannot see that Euronews would have turned to a Hungarian governmental mouthpiece so far. But of course, they hope that acquisitions like that can help to shift the European public as well in a more pro-Hungarian direction, or more in favor of Viktor Orban himself.
Now, lastly, because we only slightly touched upon the topic, is this trip to India, Viktor Orban's trip to India, is this a big topic these days in Hungary? And is this as controversial as, for example, Robert Fico's trip to Vietnam?
Exactly. I think that's the main topic in Hungary at the moment, and this is typically the kind of news that can have an impact of voter perception. Media acquisition, this is usually too far, too abstract to understand, and you can argue for that from a governmental perspective. Going to India on a luxury trip in the time when there's an economic recession in Hungary and the standards of living is rather on the decline, it's really hard to justify. Viktor Orban built up an image in the last 15 years as a really modest politician who just goes to the Lake Balaton or maybe Croatia when he's choosing his destinations for vacation. Right now, he goes to a luxury trip to India, and even if the governmental media wants to explain that, there's also an Ayurvedic healer teamed up with him. It's not really obvious why. And even if he claims that there was no public money involved, he had his bodyguards around, so it definitely costs a lot of money for the taxpayers. So I think it is an issue that will also lead to a small decline of popularity of Fidesz and maybe a bit more rise of the TISA party, which in these times can be pretty important.
And we know about this lavish trip only because of local Indian media.
Exactly.
Thank you for that, our colleagues. Péter Kreko, director of the Political Capital Institute, was our guest this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more news and comments here on TVP World.